Senator Kerrey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Rice. Let me say at the beginning, I'm very impressed, and indeed I'd go as far as say moved by your story, the story of your life and what you've accomplished. It's quite extraordinary, and I want to say at the outset that notwithstanding perhaps the tone of some of my questions, I'm not sure that had I been in your position or Sandy Berger's position or President Bush or President Clinton's decision that I would have done things differently. I simply don't know. But the line of questioning will suggest that I'm trying to ascertain why things weren't done differently. Let me ask a question well, actually, let me say, I can't pass this up. I know it'll take into my 10-minute time, but as somebody who's supported the war in Iraq, I'm not going to get the National Security Advisor 30 feet away from me very often over the next 90 days. And I've got to tell you, I believe a number of things. I believe, first of all, that we underestimate that this war on terrorism is really a war against radical Islam. Terrorism is a tactic. It's not a war itself. Secondly, let me say that I don't think we understand what how the Muslim world views this, and I'm terribly worried that the military tactics in Iraq are going to do a number of things, and they're all bad. One is no, please do not do that. Do not applaud. I think we're going to end up with civil war if we continue down the military operations strategy that we have in place. I say that sincerely as someone that supported the war in the first place. I mean, to say secondly that I don't know how it could be otherwise, given the way that we're able to see these military operations, even the restrictions that are imposed upon the press, that this doesn't provide an opportunity for al-Qaeda to have increasing success at recruiting people to attack the United States. It worries me, and I wanted to make that declaration. You needn't comment on it, but as I said, I'm not going to have an opportunity to talk to you this closely, and I wanted to tell you that I think the military operations are dangerously off track, and it's largely a U.S. Army, 125 out of 145,000, largely a Christian army in a Muslim nation. So I take that on board for what it's worth. Let me ask you, first of all, a question that's been a concern for me from the first day I came on the commission, and that is the relationship of our executive director to you. Let me just ask you directly, and you can just give me keep it relatively short, but I wanted to get it on the record. Since he was an expert on terrorism, did you ask Philip Zelikow any questions about terrorism during transition, since he was the second person carded in the National Security Office and had considerable expertise?
Philip and I had numerous conversations about the issues that we were facing. Philip was, in fact, as you know, had worked in the campaign and helped with the transition plan. So yes.
Yes, you did talk to him about terrorism.
We talked. Philip and I over a period of, we had worked closely together as academics.
Just
of course, talked about
during the transition, did you instruct him to do anything on terrorism?
Oh, to do anything on
yes.
terrorism, to help us think about the structure of the terrorism. The Dick Clark's operations, yes.
You've used the phrase a number of times, and I'm hoping with my question to disabuse you of using it in the future. You said the president was tired of swatting flies. Can you tell me one example where the president swatted a fly when it came to al-Qaeda prior to 9/11?
I think what the president was speaking to was
what fly had he swatted?
Well, the disruptions abroad was what he was really focusing on. When the CIA would go after Abu Zubaydah, or go after this guy, and
Dr. Rice, we only swatted a fly once on the 20th of August, 1998. We didn't swat any flies afterwards. How the hell could he be tired?
We swatted at. I think he felt that what the agency was doing was going after individual terrorists here and there, and that's what he meant by swatting flies. It was simply a figure of speech.
Well, I think it's an unfortunate figure of speech, because I think especially after the attack on the Cole of the 12th of October 2000, it would not have been a swatting of fly. It would not have been. We did not wait to get need to wait to get a strategic plan. Dick Clark had in his memo on the 25th of January overt military operations. As a part, he turned that memo around in 24 hours, Dr. Clark. There were a lot of plans in place in the Clinton administration, military plans in the Clinton administration. In fact, just since we're in the mood to declassify stuff, that was he included in his January 25th memo 2 appendixes. Appendix A, strategy for the elimination of the jihadist threat of al-Qaeda. Appendix B, political military plan for al-Qaeda. Why didn't we respond to the Cole?
Well,
why didn't we swat that fly?
I believe that there's a question of whether or not you respond in a tactical sense or whether you respond in a strategic sense, whether or not you decide that you're going to respond to every attack with minimal use of military force and go after every, and on a kind of tit-for-tat basis. By the way, in that memo, Dick Clark talks about not doing this tit-for-tat, doing this on a time of our choosing. I'm aware, Mr. Kerrey, of a speech that you gave at that time that said that perhaps the best thing that we could do to respond to the coal and to the memories was to do something about the threat of Saddam Hussein. That's a strategic view. And we took a strategic view. We didn't take a tactical view. I mean, it was really, quite frankly, I was blown away when I read the speech because it's a brilliant speech. It talks about really an asymmetric
I presume you read it in the last few days?
Oh, no, I read it quite a bit before that. It's an asymmetric approach. Now, you can decide that every time Al-Qaeda does
You're saying that you didn't have a military response against the cold because of my speech?
I'm saying,
That had I not given that speech, you would have attacked him?
No, I'm just saying that I think it was a brilliant way to think about it. It was a way of thinking about it strategically, not tactically. But if I may answer the question that you've asked me, the issue of whether to respond, how to respond to the coal, I think Don Rumsfeld has also talked about this. Yes, the coal had happened. We received, I think, on January 25th, the same assessment, or roughly the same assessment of who was responsible for the coal that Sandy Berger talked to you about. It was preliminary, it was not clear, but that was not the reason that we felt that we did not want to, quote, respond to the coal. We knew that the options that had been employed by the Clinton administration had been standoff options. The president had, meaning missile strikes or perhaps bombers would have been possible, long-range bombers, although getting in place the apparatus to use long-range bombers is even a matter of whether you have basing in the region. We knew that Osama bin Laden had been, in something that was provided to me, bragging that he was going to withstand any response and then he was going to emerge and come out stronger.
But you're figuring this out. You've got to give a very long answer.
We simply believed that the best approach was to put in place a plan that was going to eliminate this threat, not respond to it tit-for-tat.
Dr. Clark, look, I may say, I think you could come in there if you said, look, we screwed up. We made a lot of mistakes. I mean, you obviously don't want to use the M word in here. And I would say, fine, it's game, set, and match. I understand that. I mean, but this strategic and tactical, it sounds like something for a seminar.
I do not believe to this day that it would have been a good thing to respond to the coal, given the kinds of options that we were going to have. And with all due respect to Dick Clark, if you're speaking about the Delinda plan, my understanding is it was never adopted, and that Dick Clark himself has said that the military portion of this was not taken up by the Clinton administration.
Let me move into another area,
So
Dr.
we were not presented, I just want to be very clear on this because it's been a source of controversy. We were not presented with a plan.
Well, that's not true.
We were not presented with
I've heard you say that, Dr. Clark. if that 25 January 2001 memo was declassified, I don't believe...
That January 25 memo,
I don't...
has a series of actionable items having to do with Uzbekistan,
let me move to another area.
May I finish answering your question, though, because this is an important point.
Look, I know it's important. Everything that's going on here is important, but I got 10 minutes.
Since we have a point of disagreement, I'd like to have a chance to address it.
No. Actually, we have many points of disagreement, Dr. Clark. We'll have a chance to do in closed session. You can't. Please don't filibuster me. It's not fair. It is not fair. I have been polite. I have been courteous. It is not fair to me. I understand that we have a disagreement.
Commissioner, I'm here to answer questions, and you've asked me a question, and I'd like to have an opportunity to answer it. The fact is that what we were presented on January the 25th was a set of ideas and a paper, most of which was about what the Clinton administration had done, and something called the Delinda Plan, which had been considered in 1998 and never adopted. We decided to take a different track. We decided to put together a strategic approach to this that would get the regional powers. The problem wasn't that you didn't have a good counterterrorism person. The problem was you didn't have an approach against al-Qaeda because you didn't have an approach against Afghanistan, and you didn't have an approach against Afghanistan because you didn't have an approach against Pakistan. And until we could get that right, we didn't have a policy.
Thank you for answering my question.
You're welcome.
Let me ask you another question. Here's the problem that I have again, it's hindsight. I appreciate that. But here's the problem that a lot of people are having with this July 5th meeting. You and Andy Card meet with Dick Clark in the morning. You say, you have a meeting. He meets in the afternoon. It's July 5th. As Kristen Breitweiser, who's a part of the families group, testified at the Joint Committee. She brings very painful testimony, I must say. But here's what Agent Kenneth Williams said 5 days later. He said that the FBI should investigate whether al-Qaeda operatives were training at U.S. flight schools. He posited that Osama bin Laden's followers might be trying to infiltrate civil aviation system as pilots, as security guards, other personnel. He recommended a national program to track suspicious flight schools. Now, look, one of the first things that I learned when I came into this town was the FBI and the CIA don't talk. I mean, I don't need a catastrophic event to know that the CIA, FBI don't do a very good job of communicating. And the problem we've got with this, both and the Moussaoui facts, which were revealed on the 15th of August, all it had to do was be put on Intel Link. All it had to do is go out on Intel Link, and the game's over. It ends. This conspiracy would have been rolled up. And so
Commissioner, with all due respect, I don't agree that we know that we had somehow a silver bullet here that was going to work. What we do know is that we did have a systemic problem, a structural problem between the FBI and the CIA. It was a long time in coming into being. It was there because there were legal impediments as well as bureaucratic impediments. Those needed to be overcome. Obviously, the structure of the FBI that did not get information from the field offices up to FBI Central in a way that FBI Central could react to the whole range of information before it was a problem.
But everybody, Dr. Rice,
the structuring of the FBI, the restructuring of the FBI, was not going to be done in the 233 days in which we were in
Dr.
office.
Rice, everybody who does national security in this town knows the FBI and the CIA don't talk. So if you have a meeting on the 5th of July where you're trying to make certain that your domestic agencies are preparing a defense against a possible attack, you knew al-Qaeda cells were in the United States, you've got to follow up. And the question is, what was your follow-up? What's the paper trail that shows that you and Andy Card followed up from this meeting and made certain that the FBI and the CIA were talking?
I followed up with Dick Clark, who had in his group and with him the chief counterterrorism person for the FBI. You have to remember that Louis Freeh was by this time gone, and so the chief counterterrorism person was the second, Louis Freeh had left in late June, and so the chief counterterrorism person for the FBI was working these issues, was working with Dick Clark. I talk to Dick Clark about this all the time, but let's be very clear. The threat information that we were dealing with, and when you have something that says something very big may happen, you have no time, you have no place, you have no how, the ability to somehow respond to that threat is just not there. Now,
Dr. Clark, in the spirit of further declassification,
sir, I don't think I look like Dick Clark.
Well,
but
Dr. Rice, excuse me. In the spirit of this, actually won't be a question. In the spirit of further declassification, this is what the August 6th memo said to the president: that the FBI indicates patterns of suspicious activity in the United States consistent with preparations for hijacking. That's the language of the memo that was briefed to the president on the 6th of August.
And that was checked out, and steps were taken through FAA circulars to warn of hijackings. But when you cannot tell people where a hijacking might occur, under what circumstances, I can tell you that I think the best antidote to what happened in that regard would have been many years before to think about what you could do, for instance, to harden cockpits. That would have made a difference. We weren't going to harden cockpits in the 3 months that we had a threat spike. The really difficult thing for all of us, and I'm sure for those who came before us as well as for those of us who are here, is that the structural and systematic changes that needed to be made, not on July 5th or not on June 25th or not on January 1st, those structures and those changes needed to be made a long time ago, so that the country was in fact hardened against the kind of threat that we faced on September 11th. The problem was that for a country that had not been attacked on its territory in a major way in almost 200 years, there were a lot of structural impediments to those kinds of attacks. Those changes should have been made over a long period of time. I fully agree with you that in hindsight, now looking back, there are many things structurally that were out of kilter. And one reason that we're here is to look at what was out of kilter structurally, to look at what needed to be done, to look at what we already have done, and to see what more we need to do. But I think it is really quite unfair to suggest that something that was a threat spike in June or July gave you the kind of opportunity to make the changes in air security that could have been, that needed to be made.